chosen the novella I guess I've chosen, is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. Won the Pulitzer Prize, was written in 1937. Didn't win the Pulitzer Prize and has since been challenged because it contains some controversial language, profanity. It is morbid and depressing in its themes, and apparently it is challenged because the author has an anti-business attitude. So those are the reasons on the book list, and we'll go ahead and read you a couple of pages. Lenny got up on his knees. "You ain't going to leave me, are you, George?" "I know you ain't." George came stiffly near and sat down beside him. "No, I knowed it," Lenny cried. "You ain't that kind." George was silent. Lenny said, "George, yeah, I've done another bad thing." "It don't make no difference," George said, and he fell silent again. Only the topmost ridges were in the sun now. The shadow in the valley was blue and soft. From the distance came the sound of men shouting to one another. George turned his head and listened to the shouts. Lenny said, "George, yeah, you ain't gonna give me hell." "Give you hell?" "Sure, like you always done before. Like if I didn't have you, I'd take my $50. Jesus Christ, Lenny, you can't remember nothing that happens, but you remember every word I ever say." "Well, you ain't gonna say it." George shook himself. He said woodenly, "If I was alone, I could live so easy." His voice was monotonous and had no emphasis. "I could get a job and not have no mess." He stopped. "Go on," said Lenny. "And when the end of the month come, I could take my $50 and go to a cat house." He stopped again. Lenny looked eagerly at him. "Go on, George. Ain't you gonna give me no more help?" "No," said George. "Well, I can go away," said Lenny. "I can go right up in the hills and find a cave if you want me." George shook himself again. "No," he said, "I want you to stay with me right here." Lenny said craftily, "Tell me like you've done before." "Tell you what?" "About the other guys and about us." George said, "Guys like us got no family. They make a little stake and when they blow it, and then they blow it in. They ain't got nobody in the world that gives a hoot in hell about them. But not us," said Lenny, cried happily. "Tell us about us now." George was quiet for a moment. "But not us," he said. Because I got you, and I got you. We got each other, and that's what gives a hoot and hell about us," Lenny cried in triumph. The little evening breeze blew over the clearing, and the leaves rustled, and the wind waves flowed up in the green pool. And the shouts of men sounded again, this time much closer than before. George took off his hat. He said shakily, "Take off your hat, Lenny. The air feels fine." Lenny removed his hat dutifully, and he laid it on the ground in front of him. The shadow in the valley was bluer, and the evening came fast. On the wind, the sound of crashing in the brush came towards him. Lenny said, "Tell how it's going to be." George had been listening to the distant sounds for a moment, and he was businesslike. "Look across the river, Lenny, and I'll tell you so you can almost see it." Lenny turned his head and looked off across the pool and up the darkening slopes, up the Gabellions. "We're going to get a little place," George began. He reached in his side pocket and brought up Carlson's Luger. He snapped off the safety, and the hand and gun lay on the ground behind Lenny's back. He looked at the back of Lenny's head, at the place where the spine and the skull were joined. A man's voice called up from the river, and another man answered. "Go on," said Lenny. George raised the gun, and his hand shook. He dropped his hand to the ground again. "Go on," said Lenny. "How's it going to be? We going to get a little place? We'll have a cow," said George. "Or maybe a pig and chickens, and down in the flat, we'll have a little piece of alfalfa." "For the rabbits," Lenny shouted. "For the rabbits," George repeated. "And I get to tend the rabbits, and you get to tend the rabbits." Lenny giggled with happiness. "And live on the fat of the land." "Yes." Lenny turned his head. "No, Lenny, look down there across the river, like you can almost see the place." Lenny obeyed him. George looked down at the gun. There were crashing footsteps in the brush now. George turned and looked towards him. "Go on, George. When are we going to do it?" "We're going to do it soon. Me and you and me. Everybody's going to be nice to you. That's the thing I want you to know. The voices came close now. George raised the gun and listened to the voices. Lenny begged, let's do it now. Let's get that place now. Sure, right now. I got it. We got it. And George raised the gun and steadied it. And he brought the muzzle of it close to the back of Lenny's head. The hand shook violently, but the face set and the hand steady. He pulled the trigger. The crash of the shot rolled up the hills and rolled down again. Lenny jarred and then settled slowly towards the sand and lay without quiver. George shivered and looked at the gun, and then he threw it from him back up on the bank near the pile of old ashes. The brush seemed filled with cries, with the sound of running feet. Slim's voice shouted, George, where you at, George? But George sat stiffly on the bank and looked at his right hand that had thrown the gun away. The group burst into the clearing, and Curly was ahead. He saw Lenny lying on the ground. Got him, by God. He went over and looked down at Lenny. And then he looked back at George. Right in the back of the head, he said softly. Slim came directly to George and sat down beside him, sat very close to him. Never you mind, said Slim. The guy's got to sometimes. But Carlson was standing over George. How'd you do it? He asked. I just done it, George said tiredly. Did he have my gun? Yeah, he had your gun. And you got it away from him? And you took it and you killed him? Yeah, that's how. George's voice was almost a whisper. He looked steadily at the right hand that had held the gun. Slim twitched. Slim twitched George's elbow. Come on, George. Me and you got to go and get a drink. George let himself be helped to his feet. Yeah, a drink. Slim said, you had it, George. I swear you had it. Come on with me. He led George to the entrance of the trail and up towards the highway. Curly and Carlson looked at him. And Carlson said, what the hell you suppose is eating them two guys? A Vice man, George Steinbeck.